Hello there and welcome to episode 77 of the Hawthorns Debate Club. My name is Jamie Clay and I am joined every week by two gentlemen to have a few conversations and discussions about West Bromwich Albion, the team that plays football at the Hawthorns where we debate. So let me start off this podcast off script by saying a warm hello to my good friend Alex Collins.
Hello.
And hello to returning podcast favourite, Tom Goff from Baggies Bulletin. Hello, mate.
Hello, mate. You all right?
Not too bad. As I've said at the very, very start, we've got a bit of a robotic nature to the way our podcast starts normally when I read off a script, and I'm not having that right in front of me right now. So if there's anything of an unusualness to the way this podcast begins, just blame it all on that. But we are now officially, Alex, you can verify my maths on this because I started last week's episode with a pretty poor showing, mathematically speaking. We are now 10% of the way into the season in the league. No? He's muted. He's muted.
Damn it. I knew I'd do it eventually. Sorry. We're now 10.86, so you've missed the 10%.
That's exactly
midway through the game against
about
Huddersfield.
70 minutes into the Huddersfield game. Yeah, no, I'm comfortable where we are with the maths there. Now we're over 10% of the way through the season. It's been a bit of a mixed bag halfway up the table. And I guess perhaps we'd have quite a positive feeling about how the season has started if it hadn't been for the latest encounter with Neil Warnock. That's left a bit of a bitter taste in all of our mouths. The Huddersfield game, a 95th minute goal that saw Huddersfield steal all the points. We're going to talk a little bit about that game, as well as the season at large. Some of the question marks that perhaps linger over the team. Obviously, the transfer deadline day's come and gone as well, so we know where the team is at. But we're going to be talking about all of them and perhaps some tangents and whatnot along the way. But before we get to any of that, let me just say a huge thank you for downloading and listening to the podcast. You could be watching us right now on our YouTube channel. Some of you are doing that. Some of you are not doing that. We have no preference. All we do is we say a huge thank you. We love you. We treasure you all for listening to the podcast in whatever way you choose to do it. All we ask that you do as a small favor and a token, do it for Tom this week. For Tom for turning up on a Tuesday evening to talk about the Albion. Do it for him. Share the podcast. Tell your friends and family and loved ones and unloved ones as well. Tell strangers about the podcast. And then hopefully there'll be many, many more for them to listen to. And you can talk about it with them. Does that sound good?
Very good.
Very good. Right, let's talk about the Albion then. We've promised people a few conversations and discussions, so let's jump right into it. Our last game was against Huddersfield Town. It was a reunion with an old enemy, Neil Warnock, playing against Carlos Corberan's old team. So there was a few narratives going into this game as well. Obviously, they were visiting the Hawthorns, the fortress, and it has been a fortress. We spoke about the unbelievable home form, only 2 defeats, I believe it was, under Corberan up until Saturday. It was a very, very difficult game. And as I said, it left a bit of a bitter taste in most Albion fans' match. In fact, mouths, not their match. But after the game, there was a very strong, visceral reaction as well to losing 2-1. Obviously, the nature of the defeat, a last-minute kind of sucker punch goal after we'd so very nearly stole all 3 points. It finished 2-1 and a John Swift goal and 2 goals from players that play for Huddersfield. It was a proper Warnock job, it feels like. But I want to talk about a few aspects of the game if you guys are willing to. But before we get into the specifics, let me just hear your thoughts and feelings about the Huddersfield game. Are you heartbroken? Was it something that you were prepared for? Where do you guys stand? Who will go first?
Shall I go? I'll go first. I'll jump in.
Love that.
Yeah, it was disappointing, wasn't it? I think, like you said, the vast majority of Albion fans were feeling super positive, weren't they, going into this one? You know, off the back of that 4-2 Middlesbrough win. You know, where we'd played well. obviously scored 4 goals, and like you touched on, this fantastic home form we've had under Corberan, that was getting talked up, wasn't it? I saw a few kind of championship pages on Instagram and Twitter sharing the fact that we'd only ever lost twice at home since Corberan took over. And yeah, that combined with how poor of a start Huddersfield had. I think they were on 1 point prior to the game against ourselves, sat in the bottom 3. From what I've read, they've had a terrible transfer window. Neil Warnock was absolutely raging at the fact they hadn't made more signings, and he was really concerned, etc., etc. So yeah, like you said, everything was pointing towards a comfortable Baggies victory. And yeah, how many times have we kind of felt like that going into a game, and then, like you said, we just end up getting sucker punched and putting in a real kind of tame, mediocre performance. So yeah, disappointed. It would have been really, really nice to obviously get another 3 points, add that to the tally before we went into the international break. We would have been sitting pretty. We probably would have been in those playoff places, I would have thought, with that extra 3 points. And yeah, the feeling, the vibe amongst the Albion fans would have been super positive. But yeah, how quickly things can turn. That 96th minute winner, and all of a sudden, yeah, the fan base is just like super doom and gloom and moaning and groaning, and yeah, it's not been pretty, has it, since that defeat. So yeah, disappointed, obviously, with what played out Saturday.
Very good. Thank you for that, Al. Obviously, we were sat together, sharing the pain, clutching one another, weeping as that goal went in. It was unlike other games that we've seen so far at home. It was a bit of a slow start, and I think Tom rightly calls it there, a bit of a tepid performance, really. Where do you think it went wrong? Some people have spoken about how sometimes in football, and you just have to give credit to the opposition for stifling us. Did we get Warnocked, or was this just that we weren't at the races on the day?
Yeah, I think Warnock is a master of daylight robbery, and I think that's what he delivered. I thought we didn't play too badly. All the signs were pointing to us absolutely thrashing Huddersfield, as Tom said. So it's beggars belief, really, how we've managed to lose that game. Yeah, Warnock wasting time, frustrating our players, setting up shop, chasing the ball. Quite an athletic, physical team. Yeah, it's perhaps you could argue the West Brom players' head. Their mentality going into the game, perhaps thinking that it was a foregone conclusion. Thinking the race has already been run. But yeah, it's tortoise and the hare all over, I think, with Warnock.
The same moral lessons to take from it too. If you're
Yeah,
not, sorry, Tom.
Sorry
I
to
didn't mean to
interrupt,
cut you
mate.
off.
Yeah,
No,
I
you
was
go,
just
please.
saying, I definitely felt there was, just my take is that, yeah, a bit of, yeah, like Alex touched on, I just felt the players weren't maybe giving Huddersfield the kind of credit they deserve. We all knew exactly how, Warnock team is going to set up, how they're going to approach games, they're going to time waste, they're going to make it difficult, they're going to be physical. But yeah, there was just an air about our players. Like you said, it was just so tepid and, lethargic that it was, yeah, it was hard to describe really, because, we'd put in such a promising performance against Middlesbrough, and we played at a great pace, and, there were a lot of energy, to then a week later produce that, and it could be that classic football saying, kind of, we just had one of those days. And the funny thing is for as poorly as we did play, we could have snuck it, couldn't we? Really, we towards the end we got in some good positions where we didn't quite, work the goalkeeper, or we got a shot on target, but it didn't really test the keeper. And then, like you said, Mayo had that chance at the end, keeper saves and they go down the other end, so we could have quite easily won it, and no one would be saying anything. So yeah, I think maybe there was a bit of complacency from the team, and yeah, and a bit of it was just one of those days for us. It just wasn't clicking. But he obviously mixed things up formation wise, didn't he? And Ajayi was missing, and he had to bring Bartley in. So these factors could have contributed also, couldn't they?
100%. I think it definitely did felt like the stars had aligned to some degree for us to carry on this rich vein of form at home, and it always feels like that in the last few years, in my memory at least, that we have always been capable of raising our game for stronger opposition. I remember the Burnley game when Asante scored the goal, how we dominated Watford when they were considered like kind of quite a quality side and only were beaten by a 60-yard wonder lob, or we drew that match at least. And I always felt like we don't punch down well. We're quite merciful in that way. We don't really beat up on teams very often, and it was definitely a game that felt a little bit like that. I definitely, without again dropping too much into or overusing football cliches, that we weren't at it. They felt like they were at it, and that felt very much like the Warnock factor as well, that he gets his teams all riled up and they're straight out the blocks and in our faces, whereas we want to kind of play a more progressive and pedestrian level of pace. And really, I guess in what we've seen recently be successful is when we're a little bit more adventurous, a little bit more intentional with what we do. It tends to work out well. There's something you've just touched on there, and a few talking points that have emerged from this game. And obviously, the first one being the lineup. The news broke that Semi Ajayi had been like sick or unwell during the week, and there was a couple of other players that had potentially been feeling the effects of illness as well. And we reverted back to the back four system that we'd struggled under, to be fair, and the back three seemed to have we'd found a home with the back three. It was one of those things where it almost felt like Corbyn was damned if he does and damned if he don't, because if he doesn't go to the back four and tries to squeeze square pegs into round holes, that he gets kind of the crowd on him for that, or if he tries to use the players in their best positions and reverts to the back four. But it seemed to really hurt us in this game, especially in the game, as Alex rightly points out in our little chat here, that on any other day felt like it could have been 2-1 the other way round. And the XG certainly indicates that as well. Obviously, going forward, we'll talk a bit more about the Huddersfield game, but do you think that this has almost proven that when Ajayi's back, one, he's a must start, but the back three system is something that we need to kind of, that's our thing now. Is that where you guys land, or what do you think?
For me, definitely. I think a back three with two wing backs. I think we need that solid platform and that extra security at the back. If anything, to allow teams to sort of pressurise us, that we can get them on the counter attack, or when they're more attacking, so they're not as prepared. So it opens them up a little bit. I'll be quite interested to hear what Tom has to say, though. I've not heard Tom's opinion on the three at the back.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I can understand the reasoning behind Corbyn taking, changing things, taking that approach on Saturday. One, I think, like you touched on, I think Ajayi is so vital to that three central defenders, and the wing back. I think him not being available was a major kind of consideration for Corbyn. And then I think also the fact that like we touched on, Huddersfield were going to rock up. They weren't really going to want much of the ball. They were going to be happy for us to have the ball and try and break them down and then sit deep and, counter attack and try and cause us problems, set pieces. So I think Corbyn was thinking maybe, going back to the back four, 2-3-1 approach was maybe to try and control possession a bit better. I think the 3-4-3 formation is better suited when we aren't having as much of the ball, if that makes sense, in terms of hitting teams, the opposite hitting teams on the counter attack. So but I agree. I'm very much a bit old school when it comes. I always think like, if managers, you kind of tinker and change formation every other week and mess around a bit too much. I never think that's a good thing. I'm kind of a firm believer in that. You have your approach and you stick with it, and you can obviously change things in game and personnel and so on. But I just think you have your kind of your formation. I just think professional football as well would probably say they much prefer it when they've got an approach and that's it. They're working on that 100% in training. They know the plan going into every game, so to speak. So yeah, I think we've looked so much better under the 3-4-3 so far this season. And yeah, I think with the players that's available to him, especially in defence, like you touched on, Alex, we are lacking in defence, are we? The loss of O'Shea was a biggie. We haven't replaced him, so I just think, to try and tighten things up at the back, to add that extra central defender into the mix with the wing backs, I think it's vital, really. So yeah, I want to see the 3-4-3 more than the 4-2-3-1 moving forward, definitely.
No, that makes sense to me. I agree with you, like wholeheartedly, both of you. I think we've really stumbled across something that suits the players in our desired starting lineup. It really seems to suit those players. I do think Corburn's hand was forced with Bartley having to come in and various other players. The inability to necessarily play out from the back, or that was hampered somewhat. It brings up an interesting question though there, and I think you've just kind of alluded to it there, Tom, in the sense that Corbyn does have although he tinkers with the formation, he does have some kind of staunch ways of approaching a football game. And we'll talk a little bit about Corbyn. Obviously, after this result, it all blew up about some people calling for his head and stuff. We'll talk about that in a little bit of time. But I always thought, and we probably can't answer this question, but how much of a tension is there between your instructions as a player and the reaction of the crowd around you? Because whenever we play out from the back and Palmer and Cripre and Ajayi or whoever are knocking it around them in a little triangle, and their player is getting progressively closer to each one every time, the ball is just zipping past with centimetres to spare, and the crowd are starting to go mental and just get it out, kick it clear, go mad. And then, or the other end of the pitch, when we get down the wing and everyone's saying, just cross it in, get it in there. But there's a clear instruction that Corbyn wants them. How much do you think that kind of the grumble in the crowd plays into the decisions of players? This is kind of a complete tangent, but I genuinely find that anxiety in the crowd, that has to surely affect like Cedric Kipre or Alex Palmer in. And then do they defy instructions? Is there a balancing act there that you guys can work out?
I think you're spot on. I think it's a funny one because obviously we've already spoken about how good we've been at home, but you're right that whenever Corberan is a bit of a football purist, isn't he? And that he wants to, like you said, play out from the back and try and create that space by taking short goal kicks and opening the pitch up as big as possible. But yeah, like you said, there's obviously lots of times where, it is a bit nervy and it's a bit touch and go, and you can feel that like anxiety and I think there's like that weird kind of like you can hear it, can't you? Just that ringing around the stadium, like everyone collectively making these
Guttural
weird noises.
noises. Yeah, it is. It's
But
literally it is pure anxiety.
you're right. But I think Corberan, he will tell him just like, you do things my way. I think you're right. There will be those players like they're hearing the moans and groans and stuff. There will definitely be a kind of flicker in there to just boot it up instead of doing what the boss wants in playing it, across the goal or a ball into midfield with them pressing or whatever. But Yeah, this is one of the things I like about Corberan is that I do think he's obviously got this. It's how he wants to play football. He's got this kind of philosophy, and yeah, even with the players he has available to him, it'd be so easy to say, well, look, I'm a bit worried
Mm-hmm.
about our centre backs and how good they are coming out with the ball and the guys in midfield and so let's kind of mix things up and play a bit
Mm-hmm.
more direct. He says, no, I'm going to try and improve these players. I'm going to work on it on the training pitch. The hope is the more they do it, the better they'll get at it. We stick to our guns. I like that about him. That's one of the things I really do like about the guy. So,
No. Yeah, that's great. And we're literally just running out to the end
yeah.
of this Zoom call here. But Alex, share those 2 words with us
A strong identity.
and we'll leave it there. Right, so we'll carry on our conversation now after Alex's 2-worded kind of exclamation mark on the end of that conversation. For those of you, though, who only listen to the podcast, there is a fly about my head that you might be visible on YouTube. But what also is visible on YouTube is a little bit of an unfolding drama with the picture behind Alex's head. He has taped it together, but you'll see that if you look at the YouTube, there is a divide between 2 paintings behind him. Al, can you just show the location where it's currently being held together with sellotape? Like, I want you to keep an eye on that, viewers, because it's going to drive your OCD mad watching this. Because I think in the first half, it might have been slightly askew at some points, but that's something just to keep track of during the podcast. Let's get back to the football, because that's probably why people listen, not Alex's artist gallery behind him. Corberan came under a lot of fire in this game. And it was one of those games where, like we said at the start, there was a lot of expectation and it probably could have gone the other way. What do you make of all of the hatred around Corberan? Well, I say hatred, the visceral reaction, I think I said earlier, around some of the aspects of the game, the in-game management. Do you put this at Corberan's feet and kind of point the blame gun at him, or where do you think you lie with Corberan and your relationship with him, Tom?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly harsh, to be honest with you. The big one at the moment seems to be, his substitutions, and what players he's bringing off and who he's replacing them with, and the effect that's then having on the game. And I think the biggest one is, your Kuzlu and Malumbi in midfield. There's been a few instances now, hasn't there, where he's brought those 2 guys off, or one or the other, and brought on either Chalobah or Mowat. And yeah, we haven't been as effective as we were, with those guys on the pitch. And because it's kept happening on a few occasions now, the fans, they're crying out for him to kind of leave your Kuzlu on, leave Malumbi on, and don't take him off, don't mess around with things. When those guys are brought off, it has such a negative effect. But I think, he's got one hand tied behind his back, really, because we haven't got many options, have we? Especially in central midfield.
Mm-hmm.
And like I did a bit of a video the other day on my Instagram page, and I just feel the way your Kuzlu and Malumbi approach games, it's high intensity, a lot of pressing, a lot of running around. Ultimately, they cover a lot of distance, don't they, in their games? That, especially your Kuzlu, you do see him start to burn out a bit around that kind of 70, 75 minute mark. And Corberan has no choice really other than to take them off, especially your Kuzlu, and bring some fresher legs on to try and either see out the game, or try and get something from the game, which was the case against Huddersfield. And his mindset obviously is probably as well that these guys, whether the fans like it or not, are going to be involved this season, because that those are the players that he has available to him. And Malumbi and Yukuzlu, they're going to get suspensions. They're going to pick up knocks. Mowat and Chalobah are going to have to play games. They're going to have to play minutes from now up until January. So, Corberan's probably also thinking, I need to get these guys on the pitch and give them some minutes because they're going to be called upon at some point in the season. But I think because we've had these kind of poor finishes to the last couple of matches, the fans have been kind of having a right moan and groan, when those changes are made, and they're kind of pointing the finger at those are the moments where the game kind of turns against us. And Chalobah especially seems to be, he's the new scapegoat, isn't he, Chalobah? I think, every season the Albion faithful always seem to have one, don't they? And I think Chalobah's most definitely it this season. So yeah, for me, I think it's unfair. For me, Corberan has to make these changes that he makes, and it's. I don't necessarily think they're having as big an impact as people think they are. It's a team collective, isn't it? There's 11 players on the pitch. So, but I think it's a load of nonsense, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, I think I agree more or less with you. I think it's one of those situations where, especially in the Huddersfield game, he kind of had to do something. He had to roll the dice a little bit. I definitely want a manager in control of Albion who's willing to gamble for a win, then settle for a draw. And I think, again, the nature of the opposition kind of forced his hand. Alex, we know on the podcast, and those people who listen regularly will know that you are very much all hail King Corberan. What do you say to these the doubters and the naysayers? Let's hear your impassioned cry.
I think they need to go and have a cold, hard look at themselves in the mirror.
Because definitely, it's more their fault than Corberan's. Basically, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, Corberan is, he's worked miracles, and I trust him. He's a clever bloke, isn't he? Like you can see by the way, in his post-match interviews, very open, very honest. I think you'd be biting off your nose to spite your face if you got rid of Corberan. I think we'd be in a lot worse a position than we currently are. He's the one that's kind of steadying the ship at the moment through the stormy seas. So, I think it would be a dark day if we ever lost Corberan.
He's definitely our most valuable asset, and I think the club kind of more or less have driven that point home by the way they've handled the transfer deadline day and such. Just to kind of bring back to the Huddersfield game a little bit and just mention something you've spoken about there as well, Tom. The new lightning rod for criticism at Albion, or the new scapegoat, whichever way you want to look at it. And it's not just that Albion fans like a scapegoat; they always like a scapegoat that they can call lazy. It's an effort issue with Albion fans most of the time. We never really seem to look at a lack of quality. We're always more concerned about a lack of perceived effort. And you're absolutely right. Chalobah came on, had a very, very, very unimpressive performance again. He's got a bit of a languid style, that Romain Sawyers. He kind of, the laid back, kind of nonchalant, but without necessarily an impressive technical repertoire like a Sawyers or someone like that. Obviously, Huddersfield in this game scored the sucker punch goal after Josh Madger had just had one saved. Quick mention to Josh Madger as well. I think personally he's done all right in that situation to carve out the chance. Perhaps the shot could have been a little bit better, but I think he's done well enough, in my opinion, to prove that there's definitely a player there. But on the counter attack, my dad was going absolutely apoplectic about Chalobah and the kind of weak initial contact with the player, the lack of challenge on the wing, and then the failure to track back, and effectively that the reason Huddersfield equalised in that situation is Chalobah, but I don't know what you guys think about it. Is Chalobah does he warrant the scapegoat kind of tag in that situation, or is it more complicated than just he didn't try hard enough and that's why Huddersfield won?
Yeah, I think I do feel a bit sorry for the chap because I just think he's not in a great position really because he's obviously not first team, and I just don't think he just fits the core brand mold at all. Like you said, you put it perfectly. He is very much like a Romain Sawyer's type, but yeah, he's not as good as Romain Sawyer's in my opinion. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you don't really know. You know, is he more attacking? Is he more defending? Like, it sounds really bad, but I just think he's just a bang average player, isn't he? And he's he's in this situation now where, like I said, like I touched on, he's going to be needed. He's going to be needed, even if it's just to bring on fresh legs, you know, at the end of every match. But yeah, the type of player he is, you know, you're spot on. You know, he's not a Malumbi type where he's, you know, he's just blooming charging into
Mm-hmm.
people and he's just 100 miles an hour and it's just non-stop. You know, his approach does come across, you know, as a bit languished and potentially a bit lazy. But yeah, it's one of them. It's not gonna get any better, is it? It's just
No,
gonna get
it's
worse.
this
You
going to
just
get
know
uglier and uglier as
it's
the
gonna
season
get
goes on. Yeah.
ugly. And like, obviously that the incident at Stoke, you know, um, hasn't helped things where he kind of swore at one of the fans, wasn't it,
Mm-hmm.
as they were coming off at half time, and that all got blooming spread across social media and all the rest of it. So yeah, it's just not a good situation. So yeah, it's I feel a bit sorry for the guy. It's again, you know, we touched a little bit on the transfer window. We so desperately needed another central midfielder, in my opinion. In my opinion, we needed a central midfielder more so than a right wing back, in
Interesting.
my opinion, because I always felt Phillips could play right wing back, and he obviously can cover left wing back. He's shown that already this season. That I thought that Corberan will be going all out to try and bring in another central midfielder because of how, you know, lacking we are in terms of players, you know, the type of players that Corberan likes in the middle of the park. So yeah, it's not pretty. It's like you said,
Yeah,
it's just gonna get worse.
I totally agree with you. I think it was one of those moments where I think looking back at their goal now, Al, that there was a few problems. Obviously, I say a few problems. It was a catalogue of errors. And I know some people have said that Chalobah just needs to go through that player on the halfway line and take the yellow card. I spoke to you after the game, whether he was probably under instructions to not give away cheap free kicks so that they couldn't waste a lot of time. And that is what kind of more or less, that might be giving him a lot more credit than he deserves. And it kind of brings us back to that instructions versus the mood of the game or the moment by moment kind of what's happening around you. But there were so many problems with that goal. You had Darnell Furlong failing to track the run, Eric Peters playing people offside, Cedric Kipray kind of was a little bit sleepy, even though, again, he was monumental. But I want to turn us to another kind of real point of criticism that's recently emerged, and this is probably a conversation that takes us going forward now, is Alex Palmer's performance. He was beaten at his near post twice by goals where the XG of the two shots collectively was something absurd, like less than 2% or something. But he's been beaten twice. He was actually beaten a third time when they were called offside from a similar back post volley, but this time they went across. It's well known now, I think, that Palmer struggles at his near post. Where do you stand with Palmer? He seems to have lost a little bit of that bark. We used to comment that we could hear it in the stands. I haven't heard that in a few weeks. Obviously, he's been beaten by shots that I think even the data suggests that you'd be expecting him to save. So, Al, is there a point now we're reaching this international break where perhaps it's time to change, or what do you think about the goalkeeper situation moving forward?
Yeah, I definitely think Palmer's one to watch at the moment. I don't think we're at panic stations just yet. Where But I mean, we've got the luxury really of having Griffiths on the bench, who's a top young goalkeeper coming through. So Alex Palmer definitely needs to book his ideas up. He needs to get the near posts goals out of his system, and he needs to, perhaps during this international break, work on that. He's a brilliant goalkeeper, and as you say, Jamie, like the way he talks on the pitch, he's a real leader. Needs to get a bit of that back. It's a dip of form. He just needs to try and find it again.
There's been other commentary around him saying that he's been not bad this season, but a bit inconsistent. Like obviously, man the match against Leeds and pulled out that absolutely world-class save. I guess my issue with him is I haven't heard his voice as much. I don't know whether this tennis racket training that was on the Instagram where he was firing tennis balls at him, then kicking and scoring still, which I don't know if you noticed about that training routine that they were highlighting with this new goalkeeper coach. How many times the trainer scored was ridiculous, really. It wasn't like it might have been a good advert for the training method, but it wasn't a good advert for the trainee, so to speak. But he certainly doesn't have much for command of his box either. He doesn't come for many crosses. He seems to be hesitant almost about making those big decisive actions. And without his shot stopping, Tom, where do you lie on Palmer's future? Would you be looking now towards youth, or would you kind of stick with him?
I think you made a good point there in that the dip in form is, Alex has obviously just said it on the chat. The dip in form has coincided with the new coach coming in, hasn't it? They obviously got rid of Gary Walsh, wasn't it? Who's goalkeeper coach for a long time, and he's overseen some good goalkeepers, hasn't he, at the club? His time with the club. And yeah, we've obviously brought in this chap who, Corberan worked alongside at Leeds, and it just jotted my memory that I remember when we brought him in that there was a few Leeds fans on Twitter. I remember reading underneath saying that, is it Meslier? It's Meslier, isn't it? Who's been the Leeds keeper for a long time, and them saying that he's always been a bit erratic, and he's always been prone to a mistake, and they've never been fully comfortable with him in goal. And yeah, I'd never really thought about it until you've literally just mentioned it. It's Palmer's form has definitely, it's dipped, and it's coincided with the new coach coming in. So maybe it's him trying new, like you said, new training approaches, and working on different things on the training pitch. Maybe it's kind of taken a little bit of time for him to get to grips with that, and so on. But yeah, I've been a little bit worried. You're right. There's been a couple of really poor goals he's letting, hasn't it? And they've kind of been at key moments in games, and they've cost us. But I do agree with Alex as well, and I do think he is a solid goalkeeper at this level. Obviously Luton were trying to sign him, weren't they, before the season kicked off, for him to be their number one in the Premier League. So they obviously, agree that, there's a good solid goalkeeper in there. I just hope that, it's just a bit of a dip in form, and that when we get back up and running again after the international break, that we can, see the Palmer of last season, who's so impressive for us last season. But yeah, it's good that Griffiths is there on the bench, because we've got a top quality young goalkeeper who is breathing down his neck, isn't he? So that's only a good thing. It'd just be interesting to see, wouldn't it, if he kind of comes back and he kind of lets in a few more dodgy goals and he has a few more unconvincing performances, whether he sticks with Palmer or not. That'll be interesting to see how he approaches that.
It's the big kind of question mark over so much of Steve Bruce's management, wasn't it? His reluctance to change goalkeeper. And I'm excited to see now on Instagram the new training methods of this coach, where he does just literally have Josh Griffiths breathing down Alex Palmer's neck while he attempts to save. I think that might be, so he's probably taken note of that and thought, actually, that's not a bad conceptual.
Just whispering things into his ear, unnerving,
sowing the seeds of doubt. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's It's a powerful mental game that he's crafting there. I want to talk to you about a couple more players, and again, this kind of moves out of the disappointment of the Huddersfield game, but there's a few players that I really want to kind of briefly talk about because our Zoom call is dying again, and I'm apparently melting right now. John Swift. Oh, mate, you're not kidding. John Swift has had a renaissance, so to speak. Yeah, let's call it a renaissance. He scored 3 goals his last 3 home appearances. Last 2 have been particularly lovely. Really seems, we said it last week, so we won't go into too much detail here, but he seems to be the key part of our attack now. In as much as Brandon Thomas Asante is the kind of figurehead and spearhead of our when you open up the lineup and you see Thomas Asante there, but in terms of in all likelihood, who are the people that are going to be involved in the goal? It seems to be that John Swift is a key contributor there. How impressed have you been with Swift, and where do you see this season taking him? We'll start with you, Al.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Jamie. I think Swift has been exceptional, particularly the last few games. It's he's definitely got a lot of talent. Whenever he's on the ball, he's a very clever player, isn't he? He goes one way and then he goes the other. He's very what's the word I'm looking for? He's very like wise, isn't he? I suppose. But yeah, that wasn't the word I was looking for, by the way.
It's
That's a
impressive, though,
substitute word.
nonetheless. It's a wisdom.
Yeah, he's very sly. Maybe is that the word? He's just a clever player, and I just hope his form continues because he's great to watch. Really been enjoying watching him the last few games.
And as Alex has leant forward there, listeners may hear a kind of a rustling and ruffling sound. That's because, as we discussed before the podcast started, Alex has trapped the predator in his office space, and so that rumbling that you hear is actually alien life forms that are present with Alex right now. Tom, another player that I want your opinion on. We raved about him this time last year. Hit the ground running, as is very much his style. Super captain Jed Wallace. He's again become a bit of a lightning rod for criticism, not as in the same way that Chalobah has or Chalobah. What did Carly call Chalobah?
Oh, I can't remember, but it was very emphatic, wasn't it?
Yeah, she'd really went for a lot of unnecessary pronunciation. I'll have to get her to record it and I'll play it next week on the podcast. But Jed, he's struggling at the moment, quite clearly. Unfortunately, I know people have pointed to the end of last season, but there does seem to be an additional part to it since he's been captain. What's going on with Jed, Tom?
Yeah, this is going to be really interesting for me. This, and I'm really interested to see how Corberan deals with this situation because, yeah, Wallace, like you said, towards the end of last season, I think there was, to be fair, I think the big case of burnout towards the end of last season. He played so many games. I genuinely think he was a bit knackered towards the end of last season, but worryingly, that form has continued into the start of this season. I don't think the captaincy's got anything to do with it. If I'm being honest with you, some people are kind of saying that that's contributing towards his poor form. I don't necessarily think that's the case, but he's definitely underperforming and he's not hitting those levels that we know he's capable of. And the big thing is obviously we've got Sarmiento, who is he's getting more and more minutes. He's got a goal under his belt now. He comes on, he livens things up. He's such a tricky player, trying to take people on, full of tricks and flicks. And the vast majority of fans are already calling for him to get a start. And if he was to get a start, then Wallace has surely got to be the one to make way for him because, like you said, Swift has had such a good start to the season. Thomas Asante, he's the kind of pivotal down the middle striker player, isn't he? Sarmiento, they're two completely different players ultimately. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting because, I hate again, in terms of one of my football beliefs, I hate it when managers have their favourites, and they're underperforming and they're not playing well, but they keep on getting picked week after week. Steve Bruce was doing that. It used to drive me nuts, and I don't care who you are, even if you're the captain. If you're not playing well and there's someone on the bench who's capable, they've got to be given a chance. And I think Wallace has got 1-2 games max after the international break to kind of hit those levels again. Because if he doesn't, he's got to be dropped, in my opinion. He's got to give Sarmiento a run of games. So, but in terms of the reasoning behind it, I don't really know, to be honest with you. I don't think the captaincy has anything to do with it. I'll be honest with you. I think captains nowadays, I think they're not as important as they once were. I think we've got quite a few leaders within the group at this moment in time. So, yeah, I don't think that's necessarily the problem. I can't put my finger on it really, but yeah, it's definitely concerning, isn't it?
It's the weight of the Christmas do preying on his mind and causing him to doubt himself on the field. I think the way that Corberan wants to play this without just chucking the ball in the box, and I know that's, again, we spoke about it earlier, a point of frustration where we get down the wing and we don't just dump it in the middle. And I understand why Corberan doesn't want us to fire a ball at Thomas Asante, who's like 5'10", and they're 6'4" centre backs. I understand why I don't do that, but that was Jed Wallace's bread and butter. And for me, it's funny, isn't it? The same fans that are calling for us to cross the ball this season are the same ones who were calling for us to stop crossing the ball last season. And I think Jed Wallace is just kind of a victim of that now. This kind of transition to a more central kind of playing area, and I think his natural hug the wing kind of play and probably being supported by Darnell Furlong without just unnecessarily like dragging him into it, but I think it makes it more difficult, really.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, to be honest with you. Like you said, that, and I think this is why Swift's been so successful in this 3-4-3, is that he's given more of a free role to roam, isn't he? And just kind of go where he wants, because he knows that the wing backs are obviously going to push up and those guys are going to be overlapping. And Sarmiento's similar type of player to Swift, isn't he? And that wants to get on the ball, take players on, link up the play. I think that's a really good point in terms of Wallace. He's that old school winger, isn't he? And you're right. If you're not set up in a certain way, those guys ultimately become ineffective, don't they?
Al, quickly, we've probably got 30 seconds before we need to start another Zoom call. Grady Diangana returned. How happy were you?
Absolutely ecstatic. It was great to see him. He looked lively. Really pleased to see him back. Can't wait to see more of him and Sarmiento. Just absolutely milking teams, just rinsing them.
Beautiful imagery. We'll be back in a second. Very good. This will probably be the last Zoom call we have to do tonight, boys. I am just noticing, Alex, that some drama has unfolded behind your head. I don't know whether this has been manufactured for the entertainment of our viewers, but people with be like triggering people just how off that is right now. Is there any on the scene DIY? Oh, look at that. Beautiful. Very good.
As if by magic.
Indeed. We finished off there speaking a little bit Grady Diangana. I'm sure we'll talk an awful lot more about Grady over the coming weeks and his impact. Obviously, as one of the players that the club were desperately trying to shift on deadline day, and he stayed with a host of everyone else. Although there was rumours aplenty going round, and the ITKs were out in force, telling us everything with precision and accuracy, what was unfolding in the dark dungeons and half-lit rooms at the training ground where fax machines were whirring and such into all hours of the night. But in reality, all that happened was we signed a Spanish fella to play right back to back up Darnell Furlong, Pippa, player who's followed Corberan around, a little bit more of an adventurous right back from what I've heard, at least. Not really know too much about the lad, but a little bit of a an alternative option to Furlong and the long throwing specialist that he is. What did you make of deadline day? What was your assessment overall? Obviously, there was a lot of fears going into it that we could be stripped, a little bit of an asset stripping, and some really kind of popular players leaving the club. BTA was mentioned, John Swift was mentioned. Obviously, we've spoken about Dean Garner. Overall, what would you grade our deadline day activity? And we'll start with you, Tom.
Yeah, it was just a bit meh, wasn't it? I think that's probably the best way to describe it. It was like you said, it was good in one sense that those rumours started to emerge, didn't they? That people were interested in Thomas Asante. I think Stoke made a couple of bids, and then Leeds were interested apparently on deadline day itself. So yeah, there was concern that we were going to lose him, and a couple of whispers about Swift and Newcastle as well. So it was really good to keep hold of those guys, because I genuinely did fear that we were going to maybe sell one of those on that last day of the transfer window. But then it's like I touched on it earlier. I was really hoping to see us bring in another central midfielder, and then it was quite clear early on, wasn't it, that we were only really going to be able to bring in a right wing back. There was a couple of players that were linked, but the reliable sources out there were saying that it's only going to be a new right wing back brought in, and that's going to be that, and they're going to try and keep hold of everyone else. So I was disappointed, and like you said, you've obviously spoken a bit about Dean Garner. Alex might get upset here, but I was I was
Don't do it,
hoping
Tom.
to see
Don't do it.
I was hoping to see him moved on, because I just feel like it's just not worked out with Dean Garner. It's not worked out, and I was thinking that he was one of the few players within our squad that we might be able to get a pretty penny for, and that might then be able to work its way into Corberan's pocket perhaps, and he could maybe bring in a couple more that he wants. But for whatever reason, nothing materialized. You've got this odd situation now where it's kind of common knowledge that the club were keen to move him on, and I think the player himself, there's definitely an element there of the player himself wanting to move on. I think it's been said, hasn't it, that he's keen to move back down south to London. He's never really settled after leaving West Ham. So I think it would have been good for all parties, really, for him to move on. But then, you've got this odd situation now where he's stuck with us until January. So it was disappointing. I genuinely thought we'd be making a couple of signings, and then to learn, like I said, halfway through the day, that it would just be a right wing back. I was thinking, that's not enough. It's not enough. We needed another central midfielder and another centre back as well, to be honest with you. So I was disappointed come the end of deadline day.
Al, obviously, a lot of people viewed it that it was a bit of a coup to keep so many players. Obviously, Mark Miles had announced at the beginning of the transfer window that we were a selling club, and people were upset about that. And as Tom's pointed out, there was the threat that we would be bringing in a number of players. But do you count it as a victory just to have kept some of those fundamental pieces of the squad? Is that going to be enough? Does that make us competitive this season, or are you in the camp with Tom that we really needed to be reinforcing to be truly considered a playoff contender at the very least this year?
The way that I'm looking at it is that we've lost arguably our best player, or at least one of our upper tier players, and then we've kind of brought in two upper tier players in Mazur and Sarmiento. Pippa remains to be seen whether he's any good. So we've got rid of a bit of deadwood, got rid of some of the players that we didn't really need, or they were kind of luxury. So I think it's been a very good window, I have to say. If anything, we've got an embarrassment of riches up front now. I wouldn't know. I think Corberan's going to have such a headache picking the front 4 players, perhaps. Agree with Tom. Midfield and defence look a bit dicey, but up front, like Diangana, Sarmiento, how you can get those 2 players into the team at the moment, remains to be seen. But I'm sure Corcoran's working on that at the moment. Um, I think we're probably good enough for a playoff position. We just need a good run of results, really, and keeping players fit, like Yokuslu and Malumbi in particular. But I think Corcoran's got quite a war chest at his disposal, so I can see him doing all right this season with what he's got.
Yeah, it was an interesting one. I don't know how I feel about. I feel like I'm probably somewhere between the disappointment that you felt, Tom, and the kind of, I guess, satisfaction that you felt, Alex. So, I sat down with my KFC on deadline day, as is customary, and I enjoyed the KFC. It was very good. But again, I think the thing about deadline day is they're underwhelming whoever, unless you support Nottingham Forest, they're underwhelming because we've been hyped up in such a frenzy with Twitter and Jim White and Sky Sports coverage that you want to see your club active on transfer deadline day, when the reality is the best business is done way ahead of transfer deadline day. The best teams have done their business. It's all shut up shop, and it's kind of the more panicky last minute moves that but we want to see him nonetheless. I'm desperate for Albion to sign anyone. And there were some exciting names out there, and there still is some exciting free agents names out there. I know you've listed some on the Instagram, Tom, this week as well. And for me, as much as I'm kind of happy that we have got back up to Darnell Furlong, I always want more. It's never enough. It's that kind of, I want a bigger present under the Christmas tree. Do you know what I mean? I wanted for us to unwrap a new striker or a central midfielder or someone to give John Swift a bit of competition. And I think where we stand with the current squad, I feel like the starting, not obviously the 11 that we start with, there's probably 14 players that I think that we have that are to the standard of what Corbyn will need to present a challenge. But I think, as last season proved, that's so fragile and kind of temperamental, any injury or suspension, and you're suddenly stripped back to a very weak position. And I feel like with players who've demonstrated, like DK, he's a bit like frail, and there's other players that pick up knocks and various sort of things across the season, that although I'm happy with what the business was, I can see it leaving us short still in the long run. Let's kind of move into, on the debate club, we don't mind discussing future events, and we dabble in the prophetic and we get into realms of the mystical, etc. And we are 5 games into the season, which was what, 10.6% or something, Alex, you said earlier?
Yeah, so, in that ball court.
In that ball court, yeah, as they commonly say. I want us to make predictions about the remaining 89.4%. Yeah, tick, ting. We've played 5 games so far. We're sat in 11th with 7 points from a possible 15. Guys, I just want you to think about the starts of the season we've had. Obviously, there's a couple of narratives that seem to have almost carried over from last season. The first being, apart from the Huddersfield game, that we seem to be really strong at home again and really struggling away from home. We're shipping goals for fun, but seem capable of scoring plenty of goals as well. I want you to reach out with your mind's eye now into the ether, and I want you to skip forward 41 games to the end of the season. From this kind of our reference point in time here, to stretch out and see, where do you think we finish after seeing us from 5 games? Where do you think we will be after 46 games? Very, very unfair on both of you. But I'm just keen to hear and curious to hear at least where you think, from what you've seen, where we'll end up landing. Tom, we'll hear from you first, if that's okay.
I think if you're to say that, you know, this is the squad that he has at his disposal for the season, I genuinely think it's going to be tough to finish in the top 10. And I know that sounds a bit pessimistic, and you guys know me. I try to be as optimistic as ever when it comes to the Albion, but yeah, obviously I just touched on it a bit then in terms of where I feel we are lacking in the squad currently, and you know, you just touched on it yourself then, Jamie, in that, you know, if heaven forbid there's an injury to Malumbi or Yukuzlu or Ajayi and Kipre, you know, and I never thought I'd be saying, you know, how important Ajayi and Kipre are, but you know, if there was an injury to one of those four or a couple of those four, you know, I think, you know, it turns us instantly from a team that could probably, you know, give teams a run for their money and probably be in and around those kind of playoff spots, I guess, to a team I just think just all of a sudden turns into a bit of a bog standard mid-table team. And I get what Alex said. I do think, you know, we look much better going forward this season, you know, because he's obviously changed the approach a bit, and you know, we brought in a couple more attacking players and there's competition for places there. We do look much better going forward, but I just think everything else behind that is, you know, we've not improved on it, and if anything, it's weakened because of the loss of obviously Dar Roche, our captain, in the summer. So, you know, I just, unless, you know, we get some really good luck in terms of players staying fit and then add a couple in January, yeah, I think we're probably going to be looking at a kind of mid-table finish, I think, come the end of the season. I'm sorry, guys. I really kind of like, I can see, you both look like really kind of upset. Upset and like, you know, disappointed in me. But yeah,
frankly, Tom, you've let me down.
Yeah, I'm sorry, man. You know, because like, look, obviously I did the first podcast with you this season where we gave our predictions, you know, and even then I said I felt, you know, we'd probably be finishing just outside the playoffs. And I just think with, you know, the way the transfer window's gone, I'd probably, you know, add a couple of places on top of that and say about mid-table, I think. So
that's okay, mate. We still love you, and though you crush our spirits, we still stand with you. Al, obviously, me and you are a little bit more rose-tinted glasses usually, and our innocence and naivety follow us around. But what do you think? Stretch your mind out now into the future. Where do you think we land this plane or ship or whatever?
I think it's such a tough thing to call with the quality of the teams in the Championship. I think, you know, I know it's cliche, but anyone can beat anyone. More so, I would say, in the Championship this season. And I suppose it was proven with Huddersfield beating us 2-1. At the start of the season, I predicted that we'd finish fourth, which I think is optimistic. I mean, I'm going to stick with fourth. I still think it's possible. I think we've got a very strong forward unit, and then I think we've also got quite a good defensive unit that hasn't fully settled yet. And I think once Forbrun can kind of click with the formation and then build a bit of consistency, I think we'll be a very difficult team to beat. But I also think that teams might they might what's the word I'm looking for?
Wisdom, wise.
Not this time, but I think they might underestimate us. You know, they might play teams will play teams like Leeds and Leicester and Southampton and shut up shop, but when they play us, they won't. But I don't think they appreciate the attacking quality that we've got now. So I think we were in quite a good position in that, and we could go under the radar a bit. But,
so we've used the first 5 games of the season to lure people into a false sense of security, is what you're saying.
Essentially, yes.
I like that. Yeah, that's very good. I think for me, If I was to kind of guess how this unfolds, I'm probably slightly backing off on my prediction at the start of the season. I think I landed in the playoffs somewhere, Alex, as well, if I recall.
Yeah, fifth, you said, Jamie.
Fifth, yeah. Wasn't the dizzying heights of fourth that you predicted, but I think I would probably back off a little bit on fifth now as well. I think my issue with isn't necessarily the squad, because I don't look around at other squads and necessarily feel they are head and shoulders clear of us. I think some of them have been picked over now towards the end of the transfer deadline day and haven't necessarily been able to re-strengthen, I think, the way they would have wanted to. I think there's evidence, as you said, Alex, on Saturday. What an opportunity if we beat Huddersfield. Everyone seemed to lose or draw or really struggle. And that's been a bit of a theme to the start of the season, that there's been no one who's really hit the ground running that I anticipate will be there at the end of the season. Preston are currently top, and there's no chance. I mean, with the deepest respect to all of the Preston fans that listen to this podcast regularly, I don't think you'll be there at the end of the season. So I think for me, there's the reality that the league itself doesn't have like a Burnley this year or a Sheffield United this year, where they're just going to maul through teams and really the rest of us are scrapping over what's remains. My biggest concern is that this away form, I don't know what the solution is there. We look like a different team away from home. I hope Corcoran can fix it, but I think, can you think that we win virtually every game we play at home, but then we struggle for points away from home? That really is gonna lead us outside the play. It's going to leave us outside the playoffs at the end of the season. There's just no realistic chance that you can be so poor away from home and it materialize that you land in the top six. I think we'll miss out by a very, very narrow margin. But I think there'll be a host of clubs that miss out by a narrow margin, because I don't think there'll be much to divide. There'll be someone that breaks away, but I think between second and 10th, you're going to have a whole host of teams that are going to be there or thereabouts. And I think, unfortunately, we'll be one of them, but we'll be one watching the Royal Rumble of the playoffs at the end. I'm not necessarily in the Royal Rumble. That would be way more entertaining if the playoffs were a Royal Rumble, though. Can I just suggest that to the EFL? 4 teams simultaneously playing each other.
I've got this horrible, just to add to that as well, I just got this horrible feeling that Corcoran is going to get poached as well at some point over the course of the season. I honestly do. I think, he's, he's built a good reputation, hasn't he, so far? I think, and I think he's done a great job with ourselves, and he's already been linked away a few times, hasn't he? And yeah, I've just got this. I don't know. It's not a big concern, because I do think the guy has got he's got some good morals, I feel, and he's got a bit of loyalty there, and I think there's definitely a sense that he does want to try and get us out of the division. You can see his drive and his determination to do that, but if someone in the Prem comes along, or a top team from abroad, say, that's too good to turn down, then he's going to take it, isn't he, ultimately? And that's another fear I've got, is that King Carlos, as we like to call him, might get poached at some point. I'm always kind of worrying about that, to be honest with you. It was quite nice when we had Steve Bruce in charge, and we knew that was never going to happen.
We were trying to get rid of him. Yeah, that's an ominous premonition that Tom has had there. That sounds.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm bringing it real down, aren't I? Like, it's not normally.
Tom, you can only do as the tea leaves say. And I know that's obviously when you consult your voodoo magic for the future of the Albion. That if that's how it lands, that's how it lands. Well, I think that's kind of more or less the podcast for this week. Obviously, there'll be more to discuss over the coming weeks. It's international break. I don't want to start an international break again. I hate it so much.
This is the worst one as well, isn't it? This is the worst one when the excitement at the start of the season.
Yeah.
You have a few games, you're like, yes, football's back. You're getting into the swing of things, and then bam, international break. Gareth
And
Southgate.
you know what?
It's
Gareth
just like,
Southgate. It feels like Gareth Southgate is aiming international break specifically at me. That might be a bit egocentric to think of it like that, but it feels like a specific attack against me. I don't know what it is, but I can't stand international football. Who's international football even for?
well, it's just like the qualifiers are just an absolute nonsense, aren't they? We're always going to get through playing the Faroe Islands and blooming Vatican City and whoever else it is we got to play. It's inevitable. So just put us into the tournament and be done with it, and then just let the season roll on.
I totally agree. Alex, any thoughts that you want to share about the hatred of your national team's favourite pastime?
I don't mind watching the international football.
Right,
I've got
that's
to
all
admit.
we've got time for.
I like any football.
No, I don't know.
If there's green on the telly, I'll be there.
Well, Alex, as always, you are the beautiful fountain of optimism that lights up all of our lives, and so we're grateful for you. And hopefully, the international break transpires very quickly, and we'll be back to talking about Albion overcoming their horrendous away form. I think the next two games are away from home, aren't they? Yeah,
Bristol and Watford, isn't it? I think next two.
Can Taylor Gordon-Hickman play against us? 3 games away from home.
No, sorry, 3 games in a week. Bristol City, Watford, and then we've got a home game against who is it? We've got a home game against somebody the same week.
Isn't it high flying? We've got high flying Preston as well, haven't we? I'm pretty sure quite early on after the international break. So
maybe we can wait. Maybe we can allow Southgate to have his moment before we welcome the mighty Invincibles, the original Invincibles. Well, it's been lovely.
Sorry.
Well, okay, it's not quite as well. It's probably more unsavoury. Well, thank you, Tom. It's always a pleasure, mate. We love having you on here. Obviously, he's returned. He's spoken about it here. In fact, I was listening to his video just before we started recording today, and obviously, his analysis is always something that we've looked to on the debate club, and we're happy to share it because we just think he's one of the great voices talking about the Albion at the moment. Especially liked his the experimental phase of Carlos Corberán, as he described it recently, and that was a particularly a fond expression that I heard in it. But you're back up and running now, mate. Where can people find you? I presume most people know where you're at, but just
just still on Instagram. I haven't branched out yet. I still keep meaning to at some point, but life keeps getting in the way. But yeah, no, Instagram. So yeah, I am looking to kind of after the international break, kick things on again and get some more regular videos on the go. And because I think that they always go down quite well. So yeah.
Yes. Follow him at Baggies Bulletin on Instagram. You're probably one of already of the baying fans that he has chasing after him, desperate for more and more videos. I know they've been pestering you over the summer holidays, mate, for videos, so I know that for a fact. But it's just great to have you back on the scene again, mate. And obviously, we love having you on the podcast here. So we'll land it there. All that remains for me to say is a huge thank you to you, Alexander Newton-Collins.
Thank you.
A huge thank you to you, Tom, insert middle name here, Goff.
Thank you.
What is your middle name?
James.
Oh, okay. Classic, vintage. I like it. And
TJ.
Well, TJ, go on.
You can call me TJ from now on if you want, mate.
Right. A big thank you to you, TJ. Thank you for listening to the Hawthorns Debate Club. We'll see you all next week. Sweet dreams. That's so much more sinister now that that's on video.